it's a Union soldier storyteller here. Wanted to bring you a new topic we'll be talking about. And who I'm going to be talking about is Banastre Tarleton. It says, you may have heard of him. He is one of the most fiercest officers in the American Revolution. And he was portrayed by Jason Isaacs, who also plays in Harry Potter. He was also portrayed by Jason Isaacs in the movie The Patriot, which came out in 2000. I was about 8 when that movie came out. I remember the first time I saw it. So I thought I'd discuss a little bit about him and what he was like, and do a little research for you. So I found out that first of all, the movie is going to explain that his name is Banastre Tarleton, or Colonel Tarleton, or Banastre Tarleton. His name is actually a Tarleton, and he's a lieutenant colonel. He was nicknamed Bloody Band for ruthlessness. Banastre Tarleton, a British Army officer, was hated and feared by patriots in the southern states during the American Revolution. His conduct illustrated and exuberated the problems the British faced in pacifying the population of South Carolina. He was a what you call a Green Dragoon. In The Patriot, he wears red uniforms and hats. They got the hat right, but the uniform is not red, it's green. And he was a detachment of the 17th Light Dragoon, British regulars. Most of it was he wound up an actual British officer, where most of his men that were in his legion were loyalists. And these men were loyalists. Loyalists are people who were born and raised in the United States. You can consider them colonists, but they can care less about the cause of liberty and the want of their own country. And they agree with the British. They agree with the British and King George III, because they're used to the way England's customs are. They like the taxes. They like the way they're treated. They like the way they're housed. Problem is the American Revolution is rooted and seated in the French and Indian War. French and Indian War was England and France fighting over the upper Ohio River. And then, of course, you had the colonists. So, from 1757 to 1763, there was a 7-year war, known as the French and Indian War, under, to note, the King of England, which was the uncle of King George III. When his uncle, King George II, dies in the year 1760, King George, or should I say Prince George of Wales, which is what he was known for, and what they called him, became king in 1760. While he was king, he decided it was time that the colonists started to pay England back because wars cost money. That's why they call it waging war. Wages are money that you spend, and you wage war against one another. It's wages. The British believe that the colonists of British North America were getting a free ride off the backs of British taxpayers. So what he did was he raised taxes. So he was doing stamp acts, he was doing tea acts, he was doing sugar acts, he was cutting off the trade, he was being a problem. So what had happened was the colonial government decided we need to form our own government. And they formed their own government. And in no time at all, there was friction between the colonists and Britain. They started meeting secretly in Philadelphia, was where the birth of the first Continental Congress, which met over Carpenter's Hall in 1774. Then there was a second Continental Congress that met at the Pennsylvania State House, known as Independence Hall. They discussed liberty and the cause of an olive branch, which became pretty much to the king's displeasure, that he levied wars, decided he was levying war against us, levying war against us, to the point where we're like, all right, we're having our free and independent states, and we're going to go basically on a war footing. So we were at conflict with them over a year, because the war started on April 19, 1775 at Lexington and Concord. Once this happened, the king started bringing soldiers from all over England, setting them up on troop ships and sending them out to the colonies. One of these men was a light dragoon officer by the name of Lieutenant Colonel William Tavington. That was his name, William. And yes, he was brutal, and he had brutal tactics, and he was very challenging. Not as bad as a patriot makes him seem. But he was called Bloody Band for a couple of reasons. Because starting in 1779, I think it was, he apparently met up at a place called Waxhalls. They called him the Butcher because he was known for brutal tactics, because at the Battle of Waxhalls, he was the colonial officers under a man by the name of Buford. From what I found out, it was May 29, 1780. And the location was in South Carolina, Beaufort, Lancaster County. He was called the Butcher, and obviously got a term called Tarleton's Quarter, because what he did was in 1780 in Lancaster, South Carolina, he came up against a Continental Army force led by Abraham Buford, and a loyalist force led by British officers that he led a loyalist force. Buford refused an initial demand to surrender, which is what Tarleton was trying to give him. Buford basically said, yeah, the hell with it, and said he's not going to do it. So what had happened was Tarleton's men attacked Buford's men. And in the process, Banastre Tarleton wound up being shot off his horse. And it seemed to his men, the men that he was in charge of, thought that he had passed, that he was killed in battle. They were mad about that to the point where now they didn't accept colonial surrender. They pretty much turned around and annihilated every colonial soldier there was. Afterward, it wound up being found out that he was wounded, that he didn't die, but his men retaliated as of a fact because they thought that he was shot off his horse and killed. They retaliated against Buford's men and attacked. Basically, they showed no quarter. Thus, the name Tarleton's Quarter was born, because his men just ransacked him. So, that's why he's called the Butcher. Now, there is some situations that people ask a lot. I looked a lot too of, was Tarleton a bad person? Obviously, he was a British officer, and yes, he would have done what the British did. Did he burn people alive? Did he kill innocent people? Yes, there's talk that he would have harassed the locals and did some damage. But in The Patriot, as you can see, the scene, if some of you have seen The Patriot, he comes in and he burns Mel Gibson's character's house to the ground and shoots one of his sons. I looked at a place. You should see this guy on YouTube. He does a little bit of what I do, but he's better at what I do a little bit. He's a professor and he researches things and he watches movies and he tells you the fictions and the facts about true things. And he did one on The Patriot. And he said, absolutely, positively, this wouldn't happen. It was just something an officer wouldn't do. Banastre Tarleton did not shoot innocent people. He only killed people he was sent to kill. No soldier would do that. Yeah, of course, in history, you have soldiers that did that. You have soldiers that didn't. Tarleton himself, as a British officer, would not kill an individual. And he did not burn people alive in churches. That scene did not happen. And if it did, obviously, if he would have done that, he wouldn't have burned you alive. That's for sure. Yes, he was brutal. In fact, I learned in two of these books, because I got these for Christmas. One is a book on the case for the defense of Banastre Tarleton, a British assessment of Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton in the American War of Independence. This is an account of what he has done. It tells you which battles he fought. He also served under Lord Charles Cornwallis when he was in the South. And he also knew Commander John Simcoe, and he also was friends with Major John Andre, who was hanged in West Point, New York, for being a spy. I also learned that he was so evil and bad, and he really treated the colonial army as bad as he did, that once treaties were made and we became countrymen with England, and England understood we were our own country, we became friends with them. We shared stories. We went to dinner. Tarleton was not invited to attend meals with officers and men because of how he treated the colonial prisoners. But he treated them pretty badly and awful. That's all I can say. So, he served in the Battle of Waxhaws, which is where he got the name Tarleton's Quarter and the Butcher. He was at the Battle of Brandywine, which is right in Westchester, which is about maybe a half hour, maybe 45 minutes from me, because I live about 15 minutes away from Philadelphia. We are a suburb, so I guess you can say we're part of Philadelphia, but we're technically not. Where I live, we're not technically part of Philadelphia. We were part of Philadelphia County till 1790 something, which is when we became part of our own county, which was Montgomery. But me and my family live about 15 minutes from the streets of Philadelphia. You have to go through Philadelphia to get to Chester County. I, for the very first time, went and saw my first Revolutionary War reenactment. And I'm a Civil War reenactor, but I've never seen, most of the reenactments I've seen have been Civil War reenactments, and half of them I've been in, but I've never seen a Revolutionary War reenactment. So I wanted to go out and check for myself. And specifically when I found out that the battle reenactment, the 245th, I believe, Battle of Brandywine was taking place, I had to go see it. And that's because Lieutenant Colonel William Banastre Tarleton, was there. Now, obviously the man who portrays him was not there for some reason, but he was at the Battle of Brandywine, which of course we lost. And then he was at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse and the Battle of Cowpens. Now, in the movie The Patriot, there's a scene between Mel Gibson and Jason Isaacs. Did he fight like that? Yes, he did. Basically, Mel Gibson played a couple people. He played Thomas Sumter. He played Francis Marion the Swamp Fox, Daniel Morgan. So he played a couple of people. But because he had that idea, he had the plan, he had the scene of fighting Tarleton himself in the movie The Patriot, he would have been playing George Washington's cousin, who actually defeated him. The person that defeated him was William Washington. William Washington was a cavalry commander, and he was also the cousin of first President General George Washington. Both Tarleton and William Washington lost their cavalry there. And he wound up at the battle's end going after the pursuit of the defiant Tarleton along Green River Road. He engaged him, and a hand-to-hand encounter took place. And William Washington barely escaped with his life, but he did. But obviously, he winds up, Banastre Tarleton winds up surviving the American Revolutionary War and going back home to Liverpool, where he was elected to Congress, to Parliament, which is like our Congress, but Parliament would be England's Congress, so he was elected to Parliament, and he was a supporter of the slave trade back when England had slaves. Obviously, the year slavery ended altogether, because the slave trade in England stopped in 1820. I learned about that a couple weeks ago. Slave trade ended in England in 1820. Slavery ended in England in 1820, from what I've learned, because we were watching something on Prince Harry or something, and they were talking about the British and what they've done. Either the slave trade ended in 1820 or slavery ended in 1820, but the slave trade ended in the 1830s. The year it just so happens in the 1830s, the year it ends, he dies at the age of 78. I think he had a wife, but never married, and he's buried in Liverpool. But he is one of the major generals that is talked about in American history, and a living nightmare for the colonial army. But he was played by Jason Isaacs in The Patriot. So this is the real person. This is who I'm talking about. He had multiple different military tactics. One of them was, burning, but no civilian. He did not kill civilians unless he needed to. And no, he did not burn people alive in churches. So, that would have never happened. And he was born in 1754 on August 21st. And he wound up dying in January of 1833. So, Jason Isaacs played him. I'll show you him. And this is basically what he looked like in the movie. See? Here's a biography of him. You can see the similarities. Same hat, same uniform in a way, but as you can see, he's in a red uniform, he's in the actual green one. So, but yeah, he became part of Parliament. He became part of Parliament after he survived. He did not die in the movie The Patriot like The Patriot intends. He survived and died at the age of 78. But he knew John Simcoe. He knew Major Andre. So he knew a few other people. He served under Clinton. He knew Peggy Shippen, who was the wife of Benedict Arnold. So that's pretty much what's going on with him. So I thought I'd share something that I got for Christmas, and I thought I'd talk to you about Banastre Tarleton and tell you a little bit about the history of him and tell you a little bit of facts. So I hope you enjoyed today's or tonight's topic of discussion. But other than that, that's pretty much all I got to say for now. I'll be back to you soon with another video. So stay tuned for the next, because we'll be discussing some more historical figures and finding out the truth and the false relations later on. So, talk to you. See you soon.